Hi, this is Dr. Jeff Zeig. Here I am in Phoenix, Arizona at the offices of the Milton Erickson Foundation with stories about Milton Erickson. Dr. Erickson's perceptiveness was legendary and probably to some extent based in the fact that he had polio, and for a year at the end of his adolescence, he was 18, he was confined to bed recovering from polio and couldn't do very much except to try to understand and listen and perceive and see if he could tell which of his siblings was coming into the house by the steps that they made as they were as they were coming into the entryway. Well, the stories about Dr. Erickson's perceptiveness were legendary, and I can recount some of them from the people who I met. I remember going to a party. It was a birthday party for a woman who had reached her 70th birthday, and one of her friends came over to me and she said, "You're Dr. Zeig?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "You're the director of the Milton Erickson Foundation?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I'm a social worker. I met Milton Erickson once. I'd like to tell you about the experience." I said, "Please." She said, "Well, I walked into one of his seminars. He looked at me and he said, 'You spent your formative years in a concentration camp.'" And that totally shocked her because there was nothing that he would have had as previous information about her. She said, "How do you know that?" He said, "Well, it's the way that you hold your body." Now, there's another example of that, which was one of the students from Philadelphia Child Guidance, set up by Mnuchin, but also where Jay Haley was collaborating with Salvador Mnuchin, and also Carl Whitaker had been there at Philadelphia Child Guidance. And some of the students from Philadelphia Child Guidance made pilgrimages to Phoenix to visit with Dr. Erickson. And this woman came, and Dr. Erickson, as was his habit, he would ask people to write down their name, address, telephone number, number of brothers, sisters, names and ages, and also whether they grew up in a rural or an urban environment. And as she was writing, Dr. Erickson looked at her and said, "You were not born in the United States." And she shook her head no. And he said, "Well, you were probably born in Europe, possibly in Southern Europe, perhaps in Italy or Greece." And she nodded politely, thinking, well, the script of somebody who learns to write in Europe, well, that's different from the script of somebody who learns to write in the United States. And so she didn't think very much about it until Dr. Erickson shifted into high gear and said to her, "And you were fat when you were a child." And she was stunned. And she said, "Well, how did you know that?" And Dr. Erickson said, "Well, it's the way that you hold your body." Now, I can remember one of my teachers when I was in graduate school who came to visit Dr. Erickson, and after a few casual remarks, he said to her, "You were probably an only child." And he was right. I remember a patient who I saw who had been a previous patient of Dr. Erickson, and I asked her what the experience was like. And she had a memory from the first session. She said that Dr. Erickson said to her, "You were not your mother's favorite, but you were probably your grandmother's favorite, probably your maternal grandmother." And that was right. Now, these stories about Dr. Erickson's perceptiveness are legend. There's many of these stories. And if you make a prediction like that, and you're with a patient, and you make a prediction about the patient's birth order or preferred relative, and you're right, it gives your future interpretations, clarifications, confrontations much more credence. If you're wrong, probably that moment is forgotten, and it's just that you're an unusual person, a psychotherapist who makes unusual prognostications. But this was a talent of inference that Dr. Erickson cultivated. And I can remember talking with one of his son-in-laws, and they had been driving in a commercial neighborhood, and Dr. Erickson asked, could they go around the block? and made a prediction about a person who was on the street who had a particular pattern, and Dr. Erickson was right about the particular gender role that was that this person was playing. So Dr. Erickson would train himself to do this like a Sherlock Holmes pattern. It's a pattern of if, then. If I see this, then this could have meant, must have meant. And I think Dr. Erickson assiduously trained himself on it. He explained to me that when he was learning psychiatry, he was taught by a surgeon in medical school who really didn't especially like psychiatry, but they didn't have a psychiatrist at the University of Wisconsin to teach him when he was in medical school. So Erickson invented some training exercises for himself. The patient would come in and he would do a traditional psychiatric mental status examination. And then Dr. Erickson would intuit a social history. He would eventually get the social history from the social work service and compare that to his intuited social history. Then he would do the opposite. He would get a social history and intuit a mental status examination, take the real mental status examination. And I think that he said that he did this with hundreds of patients to try to understand if, then, when, then. And those of you who would read Sherlock Holmes would know that in the novelette, The Hound of the Baskervilles, this is what Holmes and Watson do. They find a cane and they start intuiting what the owner of the cane would be like. And as it turns out, they were completely wrong, which was very exciting to them because they realized where they misstepped in making their intuition. Dr. Erickson would give me tasks. He would give me little assignments that would help me to develop this. He would suggest to me that I could watch a group of children and predict which child would speak next, which child would leave the group next, which child would go to which toy next. And so developing this inferential style was something that he cherished inside of himself. I remember Dr. Erickson giving me a book, not a very distinguished novel called Nightmare Alley by William Gresham, long out of print. But Dr. Erickson said that he got the book from his wife and daughter who had read it, and they recommended it to him. And he read the first page of the novel and told them what it said on the last page. He gave me the novel. He said to me to read the first page, which I did. And then he said, "What does it say on the last page?" I had no idea. I said, "What does it say?" He said, "Read the book." I read the book. I got to the last page. I compared it to the first page. If I knew what I had been reading, I would have seen that the inferences, the seeding, the foreshadowing, if you will, on the first page would have indicated to me what it said on the last page. So this is a facet of Dr. Erickson, learning about being not intuitive, but learning about a pattern of inference. This is Jeff Zeig. Here I am in Phoenix, Arizona, at the offices of the Milton Erickson Foundation, Stories of Milton Erickson.